Hello everyone and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets and drama. So I'm back for another Have Your Say video, and this video is for Season 16 Episode 12. So today we're going to be recapping the episode, going through the results of the Have Your Say poll where you get to vote whether you agree with the outcome of the episode, and I'll be talking about some unrelated drama to do with Shea Coulee calling out a fake tweet that was spreading misinformation. All that and more coming up in today's video, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start by recapping the episode. So the queens come back into the workroom after the lip sync between Morphine and Maya and then Maya's elimination. And they're sad that Maya was eliminated but said that she was a great lip syncer. The queens then sit down and Sapphira is applauded for winning last week's challenge. However, Q does not look very happy because she believes that she and Plain Jane should have won the challenge, or maybe just Q on her own. And Q was obviously very unimpressed, and as I said last week, you could see on the runway that Q was just not having any of it. The queens then ask Q to talk about how she's feeling, but she says she doesn't want to and she's okay. And some of the queens imply as though perhaps Q is being a bit of a sore loser. The queens come back into the workroom the next day and Q talks a bit more about why she was so upset, and she explains that the reason that she didn't say anything is because she didn't want to say something that she would regret and she didn't want to get too heated. And she said that she didn't want to try and take anything away from Sapphira's win, but Sapphira does say that it did feel that way, that she was trying to discredit Sapphira's win. The queens then find out that the mini challenge for this week is they have to do a t-shirt inspired by the late great Tammy Faye, where the queens put on a full face of makeup and then smear it onto the t-shirt. I thought this was a really funny mini challenge and I loved seeing the queens getting ready, and I thought some of their makeup was so funny because it basically looked really cartoony, and obviously that's kind of the point. I also thought it was funny that each t-shirt said something different to do with the queens, and I also thought it was so funny seeing the queens rub their face all over the pit crew wearing the t-shirts. And Plain Jane ends up winning the mini challenge. So RuPaul then announces that the main challenge for this week is that the queens have to get in pairs and then design their own bathroom which is gender inclusive. And this challenge, you may remember, is kind of similar to on All Stars 4 where they had to create their own nightclub, and then there was the iconic Club 96. And they also did something similar on All Stars 5 as well. And the teams are Plain Jane and Sapphira, Morphine and Q, and Dawn and Nymphia. Morphine and Q decide to go for a kind of heaven and hell, but more leaning towards the hell, with things like spikes on the toilet seats. Nymphia and Dawn talk about farting, and then they say the Museum of Modern Fart, which is the Museum of Fine Art. And then Plain and Sapphira go for a more vintage speakeasy style. The queens then get to work on actually decorating and setting up their bathrooms. And I thought this was really funny, and I thought the bit where Plain Jane says that she doesn't do manual labour was really funny. And I couldn't tell whether this was just for television or whether she actually doesn't do manual labour. And I also thought it was funny watching the queens, for example, like Morphine struggling to paint, because I do think this is actually be a very, very difficult challenge because you not only have to design and then create the room, but you also have to come up with your own concept and make it funny. So it's kind of a mix of design plus improv and comedy. One part that they did make sure that they showed in the edit, and I think this was to try and do some foreshadowing for later in the episode, was that Dawn was trying to make lots of suggestions for the bathroom, but Nymphia kept saying no and shooting the ideas down, or just didn't seem to like Dawn's ideas. And Dawn was kind of having this storyline that she felt like last week she was paired with Maya and felt like she was kind of at a disadvantage for being paired with Maya. And then she feels like potentially this week she also might be at a disadvantage being paired with Nymphia, because Nymphia was saying that she didn't really know how to do this, which is something that we've seen quite a few times from Nymphia. One part I was really surprised about is when Plain Jane got some of the red paint and painted it on Nymphia and Dawn's wall. And I thought they were going to be annoyed about this because I would have thought it might have ruined what they were doing with their painting. But Dawn didn't really seem to be that annoyed by it. She kind of made a big deal of it for camera, but then they all started painting each other's walls. And at Roscoe's this week, Dawn was there and she talked about this. And for those of you who haven't watched my Roscoe's, I'll put a link in the description. But Dawn did say that they all had so much fun this week and they were all painting on each other's walls. So I guess painting on each other's walls isn't that big of a deal, and they must have been able to just paint over it. We then see the queens come back into the workroom the next day and they're getting ready for the main stage. And one part that was quite unexpected is that Plain Jane started talking about her feelings and said that she often felt like she had to bottle up her emotions and put on a really brave face and put up an armour, but she felt like that armour was really getting broken down, and she then broke down and started crying. And the other queens seemed quite surprised by this because this has been the first time that we've ever really seen Plain break down and show this kind of emotion. And I really loved that Saphira was being very motherly and she stepped in and really helped Plain and said, write down all of the things that are making you feel that way, then rip them up and throw them behind you so you can move on. And I thought this was just such a lovely moment, and it really did solidify Saphira as being this motherly figure that they've said throughout the whole season. Okay, so before we talk about the Maxi Challenge performance, I'll first talk about the runway, and this week's category was chain reaction. And as I've done in previous weeks, I'm not going to give my actual critique of the fashion because it's just not my thing, but I will say which of the looks was my favourite. So first up we had Morphine Love Dion, and she said that she has chains everywhere and she took inspiration for this look from Jabari Realness. And she said the Jabaris lure men with their song Into the Waters and then she steals all their gold. Next we had Q, who said she's rattling down the runway and she's wearing pants with red chains all down the side. And then if you go up, she has a bolero top with chains swooping down from the arms. And she's really feeling her chain fantasy. Next we had Dawn, and she said this is Dungeon Dawn. And she has many disciples and she hates all of them because they're all ugly little dungeon dwellers. But she is the prettiest bee in all the land and she's draped and rouged with the chains that are sickening. And if you've watched my Roscoe's for this week, you will see that Dawn, who was at Roscoe's, said that this was actually not the look she originally was going to wear because her original look was quite similar to her 80s look from last week. So she actually made this look the week before the runway using some spare material and some chains that she asked production to buy for her. Next we had Nymphia Wind, and she said she's serving Switch Dom, and the chains that you see look like knots, which are traditional Chinese knots. And she likes to look dainty and soft, but she's going to whip the bleep out of you. Then we had Plain Jane, who said that she is an alien sex cyborg, and she can barely move her arms because she's been chained up, and she's finally broken free and is ready to invade planet Earth. And then finally we had Saphira Crystal, who said that she is walking in the garment feeling pussy as a dog, and she's serving you BDSM realness and giving you puppy play, but she's also giving you high fashion and something that you've not seen from Saphira before. And so in terms of my favourite, I found this really difficult because I really loved several of them. I thought Nymphia's was absolutely stunning. Saphira's was so cool and so different, but also really fashion. But one of the people I actually really enjoyed was Morphine Love Dion, and I think it was because I just really loved that colour gold. She had so many chains, I think it really hit the nail on the head of chains. So I would have to say I think Morphine was actually my favourite this week because she just looked so amazing and it was so obvious that the theme was chains. Okay, so let's move on to the Maxi Challenge performances, and Michelle and Carson were posing as two eccentric German club owners, and they had to go around each bathroom and then they would interact with it, and then that was used to help with the judging. Okay, so the first team up was Q and Morphine, and theirs was called Naughty Potty. I actually thought this was a really funny concept of having the idea of hell in a bathroom. And I think they had a couple of really interesting ideas, like for example, the hooks that were hands that just dropped the stuff, the broken mirror for 7 years of bad luck. One thing I did think was funny was the toilet with the spikes on it, but also the fact that the toilet paper was so high that it was just out of reach. And I thought that was a really funny concept because obviously this is about hell. And in general, I thought Q probably did a little bit better than Morphine. She seemed a bit more confident. Morphine was obviously playing the slightly more airhead one, but she did seem like she forgot a few lines and maybe wasn't quite as good as Q. But overall, I still thought it was fun and I quite liked their concept. So the next was Dawn and Nymphia, and their concept was the Fart Museum, or the Museum of Modern Fine Art. I thought it was a fun idea of having the Fart Museum, but I thought that there was a lot more comedy that could have happened, but their bathroom, although it did look really cool, it didn't really have that much to do with the whole fart element, which I thought they would lean into a lot more. The one bit I thought was actually the funniest was when Carson and Michelle got on the toilet and they swiveled them round and put them together. But other than that, I didn't really enjoy this concept that much. It wasn't really that funny compared to some of the others, and I just didn't quite get the whole concept and how it tied together. And as we heard in the judges' critiques, I do think that Nymphia talked a lot, and at times it did seem like she was talking over Dawn. But it's difficult to tell whether this was just the edit, because at Roscoe's, Dawn did say that she can't blame Nymphia for over-talking her. So it's not clear whether Dawn just didn't really have much to say and therefore allowed Nymphia to talk over her, or whether Nymphia did actually talk over Dawn. And then finally, we had Plain Jane and Sapphira Cristál with the Bootlickers Speakeasy. And it was supposed to be a Prohibition-era powder room. I thought this was by far my favourite. I think Plain and Sapphira are two of the best improvers and actors in this whole cast, so I think they were a really good duo in this. They both seemed really confident. I thought they had really funny characters, and the fact that they kept pulling bottles of alcohol out of random places, because obviously it was a Prohibition era speakeasy, I thought that was a really fun running gag. To be honest, my favourite bit though from this whole thing was when Sapphira was singing, and she was obviously singing very well because she's very good at that, but my favourite bit was just the look on Plain Jane's face when she just kept hitting that triangle. I just thought that was such a funny gag to put in this, and was something kind of unexpected. And then of course there were some innuendos with the toilets having a hole in the wall. And overall I do think that these two were by far the funniest, and they had the best concept and also the best jokes, and they improved and worked together the best. And so moving on to the judges' critiques, and we find out that, perhaps unsurprisingly, Plain Jane and Sapphira are the winning two, and they both win this week's challenge. And as I said, I do agree, I think they were by far the best team. And what I thought was interesting is that they broke up the teams, and the bottom two were actually Morphine and Dawn, who obviously came from two separate teams. And they have done this on Drag Race before, splitting up teams and pulling someone from one team and someone from another team. And I personally think that perhaps they should be judged in teams if it is a team challenge. But in some ways this was perhaps slightly inevitable, because I think from the track record, Dawn and Morphine were probably the two that were the weakest. So Morphine and Dawn lip sync to Body by Megan Thee Stallion, and Morphine wins. And I will talk about this lip sync later in the comments, because a lot of people had a lot to say about this. And so sadly, Dawn was eliminated. Okay, so now let's move on to the results of the Have Your Say poll. So question 1 was, do you agree with the outcome of this week's episode, i.e. tops, bottoms and elimination? And with 81.4% we had yes, and with 18.6% we had no. So the vast majority of people did agree with the outcome of this week's episode. So moving on to question 2 was, in your opinion, who should have won this week? And with 63.8% we had Sapphira Cristál. And I do agree, I thought Sapphira and Plain both did equally a great job, but I do think that Sapphira perhaps had a slightly funnier character, and she seemed a bit more at ease with the improv. Next we had Plain Jane with 28.8%, and then next we had Nymphia Wind with 4.8%, which I do find kind of surprising, which we'll talk about in a minute, because a lot of people in the comments felt like Nymphia was over-talking Dawn and therefore should have been in the bottom. So question 3 was, in your opinion, who should have been eliminated this week? And with 66.6% we had Dawn. And unfortunately, I do think because of the lip sync and because of everything else, I can see why Dawn was in the bottom. I do think that she kind of got lost in the challenge because Nymphia was doing most of the talking. And Dawn also did have no wins, so from the track record point of view, I can see why she was in the bottom, although I did think she was a very fun competitor. Next, we had Morphine Love Dion with 16.5%, which makes sense because she was also in the bottom too, and I do feel like between her and Q in her group, she was the weaker one. And then we also had Q with 12.1%. Question 4 was, in your opinion, who was the best in the challenge this week? And again, unsurprisingly, we had Sapphira Cristál with 63.6% and Plain Jane with 29.8%. And then, as I said earlier, similar to that is 4.3% for Nymphia Wind. Question 5 was, in your opinion, who had the best runway look this week? And in first place, we had 41.3% for Nymphia Wind. And I do agree, I thought Nymphia's look was amazing. I loved that blue colour, and I thought every part of the detail just looked so well done and so thought out. And Nymphia always brings it on the runway, so that's not a huge surprise. Next, we had Sephira Cristal with 36.9%. And as I said earlier, I loved Sephira's look. She also is always amazing on the runway. And I think the reason this outfit worked is because it was so different for Sephira. And I really liked the way that she incorporated the chains, not just hanging, but she used it as kind of fringe around the outfit. And then in third place, we had Morphine Love Dion with 12.5%, which, as I said earlier, that was the one that I picked as my favourite, although I did love Nymphia and Sephira as well. But I just loved the colour gold on Morphine. I just thought it looked so good, and I really liked the way it was just so obvious that the outfit category was chains. And then between the other queens, Q, Plain and Dawn, they all had about 3%, so they were kind of equal. And then finally, question 6 was, in your opinion, who is the front runner so far, i.e. the most likely to win the season? And unsurprisingly, we had 80.4% for Sephira Cristal. And I think by now we've said that Sephira, I think, is most likely to win. She has the best track record by far and the most amount of wins. I also just think she has such a great storyline because she's been so nice to everyone and really supportive and very motherly. And I think that that's really helped Sephira because the queens really respect her and I think the audiences really like her, plus the fact that she's also extremely talented. And then we had Nymphia and Plain with 9.4% and 9% respectively, and then Q with 0.4%. Okay, so let's move on to the comments for this week. And the first comment comes from my Patreon member Rochelle, who said, I thought morphing was so funny, you guys. People want to visit the Naughty Potty because it's like a mixture of like interior sickening design with like torture and pure agony. And I thought morphing was okay. She did drop a few lines here and there, but I thought she played her kind of ditzy character quite well. But Rochelle also said this was, however, one of the most predictable episodes we've seen. It went the way it was supposed to go. And I do agree, a few other people in the comments also made this point. I think it was obvious that Morphine and Dawn were the two that were going to be in the bottom, both based on the track record mainly, but also the performances in the maxi challenges. And my Patreon Lisa said something very similar and said, I think the outcome of the episode was as expected. I pretty much agreed with all the critiques, which is a bit rare. And yeah, I definitely can see that. I think it was quite obvious who was going home this week. And this brings me on to some comments that were made quite a lot, which were to do with the lip sync between Dawn and Morphine, and the lip sync song was Body by Megan Thee Stallion. And a lot of people were saying that this was really rigged against Dawn because Morphine is obviously the body queen. She's the BBL queen of Miami. Dawn just didn't really stand a chance. And that's what a lot of the comments were saying, that they kind of felt bad for Dawn because there was no way she was going to win. And I do agree. I did feel a bit sorry for Dawn because when we saw that the lip sync song was going to be Body by Megan Thee Stallion, I did feel quite bad for Dawn because it did feel a little bit like they were trying to stack the odds in Morphine's favour by giving them that song. And in fact, Dawn did say at Roscoe's this week that she knew that there was absolutely no way she was going to win against Morphine in that song. One of the other topics that came up quite a lot in the comments was people saying that Nymphia should have been in the bottom because she kept over-talking Dawn and interrupting her. And I do think this was something that perhaps the judges maybe could have mentioned a little bit more. They did mention that Nymphia didn't let there be any breathing room or dead air, which is kind of along the same lines. But from the edit, at least, it did look like she was over-talking Dawn, although Dawn did say at Roscoe's that that wasn't really the case. And then finally, we had a couple of comments from people who said that Sephira has really carried herself so well in such a classy and graceful way, and they definitely think that she's going to win. And I definitely agree. I think Sephira is my choice for the winner. I do think she's going to win in most likelihood, because I think not only is she extremely talented, but she's also just been so nice and supportive to the queens, and she has a great storyline. But I guess we'll have to wait and see, because maybe a lot can change in the next few episodes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a little bit of unrelated drama this week to do with Shea Coulee calling out a fake tweet. What happened was that Olivia Lux and Jan had done a collab with Starbucks, which was posted on social media in collaboration with RuPaul's Drag Race and Starbucks. And people then started criticising Olivia and Jan because some people have accused Starbucks of being Zionist and pro-Israeli. And I'm just going to briefly explain a bit of the backstory because this is relevant to the situation. So, as many people will know, the Israeli-Palestine conflict has been going on for many, many years. However, the Israel-Hamas war, which started more recently in October 2023, brought even more attention to this issue of Israel and Palestine. And many people and companies have been criticised for their stance on this subject. And one of the companies that has received criticism is Starbucks, although Starbucks has refuted the claims made against them. I did some research to try and find out why Starbucks was being accused of being Zionist or pro-Israel, but my research may not be 100% complete, so please let me know in the comments if there was anything I missed. So from what I could find, what happened was that back in October 2023, according to an article in the New York Post, Starbucks Workers United, which is a large union that represents several hundred of Starbucks outlets, retweeted a tweet which showed a bulldozer tearing down the Israeli fence, and the union retweeted this and said, "Solidarity with Palestine." The tweet was apparently deleted fairly shortly after it was published, and as a result, Starbucks itself received a lot of backlash, with people saying that Starbucks was supporting the atrocities of the war, and there was a call for people to boycott Starbucks. Starbucks responded to the situation and released a statement saying, "We unequivocally condemn acts of terrorism, hate and violence, and disagree with the statements and views expressed by Workers United and its members. Workers United's words and actions belong to them and them alone." And they said that the union's views do not represent Starbucks' views, positions or beliefs. And then, according to an article in AP News, Starbucks threatened to sue the union for using the Starbucks name, and the union have also apparently countersued in response. The other allegation against Starbucks is that their former CEO, Howard Schultz, is apparently pro-Israel. According to an archived article in the Seattle Times from 1998, Howard Schultz, who is Jewish, received the Israel 50th Anniversary Tribute Award for, quote, "playing a key role in promoting a close alliance between the United States and Israel." And this was apparently one of the other reasons why people claimed that Starbucks and their former CEO are pro-Israel. However, Starbucks have denied these claims, and in fact they have a dedicated Q&A section on their website called Facts About Starbucks Middle East. On the website, one of the questions is it true that Starbucks or Howard Schultz provides financial support to Israel? And the answer said, no, this is absolutely untrue. Rumours that Starbucks or Howard provides financial support to the Israeli government and or the Israeli army are unequivocally false. Starbucks is a publicly held company and as such is required to disclose any corporate giving each year through a proxy statement. And Starbucks also said, "We decided to dissolve our partnership in Israel in 2003 due to the ongoing operational challenges that we experienced in that market." And so Starbucks were claiming that they were falsely being labelled as pro-Israel, but some people didn't believe them. But how that relates to Drag Race is that when Olivia and Jan then appeared in the Starbucks ad, people criticised them for doing so. And then on the website Reddit, one of the subreddits called RPDR Drama posted about a tweet which was revealed later to be fake. And the tweet was supposedly a deleted tweet from Shea Coulee. And the tweet said, "Okay, Jan, the Zionist sport, we see you and your little genocide funder friend Olivia Lux. Way to be a sellout." And just to reiterate, this was a fake tweet and was not from Shea. And this post on Reddit received a lot of attention on Reddit and on Twitter. And as a result, people started to believe that this was a real tweet, and they started sending hate to Olivia and Jan as well as Shea. And then the original Reddit post was deleted. However, Shea then tweeted a few days later and said, "It has been brought to my attention that one of the moderators of the RPDR Drama Reddit thread, D1CK Repellent, created and posted a photoshopped tweet that they claimed I deleted in an attempt to ignite fury around a Starbucks commercial that aired on Drag Race. Let me be very clear, this behaviour is completely unacceptable and I do not take kindly to being intentionally misrepresented and lied on. Actions like this do not go without consequences and this person needs to be held accountable for their actions. I have contacted them directly to give them the opportunity to remedy the lies they created and spread online. Hopefully they take accountability and make the necessary decisions to correct the misinformation that they intentionally perpetuated." And then in the replies to Shea's original tweet, someone asked Shea who was the original poster of this fake tweet, and Shea responded with a screenshot of the original post and said that the original user can no longer be found. And Shea said, "It seems that the original post was created by Pink Lion Drag, but for some reason I can't see their profile to contact them directly. Almost seems like they're running from something." Then, one of the moderators of the RPDR drama subreddit posted a statement, and I won't read the full statement, but they basically said that they took the original tweet from a different subreddit and they didn't realise the tweet was fake. And they urged people to verify their sources before spreading wrong information, and they apologised to Shea. Shea then retweeted her response to the original post and said, "I have spoken with them directly and they assured me that they did not create the photoshopped tweet but just reshared it in the thread. I appreciate their apology and how they addressed this situation head on and issued an apology. Thank you." But it looks like Shea has since deleted these tweets, although some of the replies are still on Twitter. And this is also just a good reminder that you can't always believe everything you read online, and you should try and verify the information before believing it. And especially, it's never okay to send hate to the queens or anyone else, particularly if it's based on information that you found online that you haven't verified for yourself. So there you go, there was the Have Your Say video for RuPaul's Drag Race Season 16 Episode 12. Let me know in the comments if you think the right person got eliminated this week and if you agreed with the tops and the bottoms. And also let me know who you think is most likely to win the season. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to all of my incredible Patreon members who really do keep my channel going. In the You're a Winner Baby tier we have Ashley, Bailey, Emerald1508, Ethan, Kat, Lisa, PC Smush, Rachel, Rochelle and Sam. And in the Shantae You Stay tier we have Amy, Anna, Becky, Charlie, David, Emmy, Linda and Shelby. You are all absolute legends and thank you so much for your incredible support. It really does make such a massive difference to my channel, so thank you so much for everything. And if you'd like to have your comment featured in my Have Your Say videos, as well as get early access to my videos and priority when submitting interview questions, please consider signing up to my Patreon and supporting my channel, and I'll put a link in the description. Please make sure you like, comment and share this video as it really helps support my channel. And of course, please make sure you hit the subscribe button to stay up to date about new uploads. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you'll join me again in future videos. Thank you, bye!